If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to Mindshock True Crime. This is the Jack the Ripper series. This is episode 3, The London Monster. Now, about 100 years before Jack the Ripper, there was a serial slasher. Some people believe this is all coincidental, but this is Mindshock, where we have to examine every possible theory in a logical and comprehensive fashion. And that's why all the Mindshock listeners are here. So we'll be examining that. We'll be examining connections. We'll be examining the London area law enforcement protocols. We'll be examining the media. We'll be examining all of these things which play very large roles in the Jack the Ripper saga, one of the most infamous serial killers in history, if not the most infamous. And we will be getting to the nitty-gritty regarding all the details that nobody else wants to go over. As always, if you enjoy the Mindshock podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube, youtube.com/Mindshock. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications, like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. All right, so we touched upon the London Monster briefly in episode 1. Make sure you check out both episode 1 and episode 2 to get all caught up in the Jack the Ripper series. Of course, we are just getting started because there actually is a surprising amount of information, not just known about Jack the Ripper, but about the London Monster here in the late 1700s. Now, how much of it is true? How much of it is not true? How much of it is partially accurate? Obviously, we have no way of truly knowing definitively, but we'll do our best. Just going to do a quick recap here from the wiki. The London Monster was the name given to an alleged attacker of women in London between 1788 and 1790. Now, coincidentally, this is exactly 100 years in terms of years. It's not the exact dates, of course, to the Jack the Ripper slayings, the canonical ones in any case, but it's curious because we're talking about exactly 100 years. So some people believe that Jack the Ripper himself was a total fabrication of the media. Not that people didn't get killed, but the very notion of a serial killer per se and the connections between victims and all the hysteria, etc., was manufactured by the media. That's a very interesting theory. Some people allege that continues to this day. I mean, including all of these infamous serial killers. I mean, the Zodiac Killer, if you haven't checked out the Zodiac Killer podcast series on Mindshock, make sure you check that out. The most definitive podcast on the Zodiac Killer. And so some people believe this is just the MO. Now, that doesn't mean people didn't die. That doesn't mean there possibly aren't connections between some of the victims, but just in general, the storyline, the narrative has been manufactured to some extent. Now, did that also happen in the 1780s? With the London Monster? And what are the connections there? So continuing here, the attacker had a signature behavior of piqueurism, the pricking or stabbings of victims with a knife, pin, or needle. History. The first reports of the monster appeared in 1788. According to the victims, most of them from wealthier families. Now, that's a curious difference there between the Jack the Ripper slayings of prostitutes or alleged prostitutes. According to the victims, most of them from wealthier families, a large man had followed them, shouted obscenities, and stabbed them in the buttocks. So this wasn't just a stealth-like individual. This was someone shouting obscenities before the attacks. Some reports claimed an attacker had knives fastened to his knees. Other accounts reported that he would invite prospective victims to smell a fake nosegay and then stab them in the face with the spike hiding within the flowers. The nosegay, posy, or tussy mussy is a small flower bouquet. In terms of pranking, some people will recognize this from clowns that spray the water out of the fake bouquet. Okay. In all cases, the alleged assailant would escape before help arrived. Some women were found with their clothes cut, and others had substantial wounds. In 2 years, the number of reported victims amounted to more than 50. The press soon named the maniac the Monster. Descriptions of the attacker varied greatly. Some men even founded a No Monster Club and began to wear club pins on their lapels to show that they were not the monster. Now, another curiosity here is the Zodiac Killer who demanded people wear pins. Is that some weird play on this situation here in the late 1700s in Britain? London, although what's kind of weird though is wouldn't the monster wear a pin or a lapel to show that they're not the monster if they want to stay hidden? Or did people just not think like that in the 1700s? I don't know. Londoners were outraged when the Bow Street Runners, which that was London's first professional police force, originally numbered 6 men, founded in 1749. Failed to capture the man. Philanthropist John Julius Angerstein promised a reward of £100 for capture of the perpetrator. Armed vigilantes began to patrol in the city. Fashionable ladies began to wear copper pans over their petticoats. There were false accusations and attacks against suspicious people. Local pickpockets and other criminals used the panic to their advantage. They picked someone's valuables, pointed at him, shouted "monster," and escaped during the resulting mayhem. I can imagine female pickpockets would have quite the field day with that. The arrest of Reinwick Williams. What a name. I don't think too many people are named Reinwick these days. On June 13th, 1790, Ann Porter claimed she had spotted her attacker in St. James Park. Her lover, John Coleman, began a slow pursuit of the man, who realized he was being followed. When Reinwick Williams, a 23-year-old florist, reached his house, Coleman confronted him, accusing him of insulting a lady, and challenged him to a duel. He eventually took Williams to meet Porter, who fainted when she saw him. Williams protested his innocence, but given the climate of panic, it was futile. He admitted that he had once approached Porter, but had an alibi for another of the attacks. Magistrates charged Williams with defacing clothing, a crime that in the Bloody Code carried a harsher penalty than assault or attempted murder. Wow. I mean, what kind of a clown reality is this? So basically, you can actually assault somebody. You can try to kill them, even if you fail, but defacing clothing is a far harsher crime. Wow. During the trial, spectators cheered the witnesses for the prosecution and insulted those for the defense. Wow. One of the claimed victims confessed that she had not been attacked at all. The court granted Williams a retrial. In the new trial, Williams's defense lawyer was Irish poet Theophilus Swift. Another interesting name there, whose tactic was to accuse Porter of a scheme to collect the reward, Porter having married Coleman, who had received the reward money. Despite the fact that a number of alleged victims gave contradictory stories and that his employer and co-workers testified that he had an alibi for the most infamous attack, Williams was convicted on 3 counts and sentenced to 2 years each for a total of 6 years in prison. He was released in December 1796. Historians have speculated whether Williams was the culprit and even questioned whether the London Monster existed at all. Reports of monster-like attacks continued to be reported for many years, although they lessened somewhat while Williams was imprisoned. Due to the likelihood that several attackers emulated the original attacker, the London Monster is regarded as possibly one of the first copycat cases. It has also been compared to Jack the Ripper, who murdered several prostitutes in London a century later and also received a similar media coverage and press sensationalism. Here's the thing, though. If, let's say, one primary attacker was going around, stabbed some victims, maybe 10, maybe 20. Other psychopaths who want to get on the action, they may also start to do this. Not even necessarily as a copycat, but if it's an itch they wanted to scratch or stab per se, they decided to do it. Then as soon as this guy's arrested for it, that's them getting let off the hook. Why would they continue the attacks? Unless, obviously a couple of crazies and the true original perpetrator, if it was not Reinwick Williams, who, if how well off was Reinwick Williams? Because is it possible he paid off his employer, he paid off everybody to give him an alibi, or are they all being honest and he really wasn't? So he went up to talk to her one time, but he admitted that. He never admitted to actually stabbing anybody, which is interesting. Here's a more detailed write-up for the Strand magazine, strandmag.com, The London Monster. This was posted June 11th, 2020, fairly recent write-up by Jan Bondison and Dennis Moore. The London Monster. In 1790, nearly a century before Jack the Ripper haunted the streets of London, another perpetrator held sway. The London Monster, as the mysterious miscreant was soon dubbed, used to walk up to a beautiful, well-dressed lady, insult her with coarse and earthly language, and then stab her in the thigh or buttocks. He struck at regular intervals, wounding a number of young and attractive women in the London streets. In a sextuple event on January 19th, his tally was not less than 6 victims. Since this kind of sadistic behavior was unheard of at the time, there was general outrage among the Londoners, and the capital's female world was in turmoil. Throughout the first half of 1790, the newspapers were full of the London Monster's latest outrages. Long-defunct papers like The World, The Argus, and The Diary did much to emphasize the sense of an elusive outside threat and the need for vigilante action. The police was roundly criticized for their failure to capture the London Monster, and it was even hinted that they were deliberately sheltering the culprit, a gentleman of wealth. And that, of course, is something that gets repeated for the Jack the Ripper theories, which we'll get to. In early April, a £100 reward was posted for the capture of the London Monster by the Lloyd's insurance broker, John Julius Angerstein. Large posters were pasted up all over London to announce that a bloodthirsty, inhuman monster was on the prowl, attacking young and beautiful women in the streets. These posters accomplished what the newspapers had started, namely to create a veritable mass hysteria. Both the police and various amateur monster hunters were out in force. Innocent men were beaten up by the mob after being pointed out as the monster by mischievous people, and the fashionable ladies did not dare venture out into the streets without wearing copper petticoats or other forms of protective clothing. Couldn't they have just carried a gun? The London Monster attacks continued throughout April and May, although it was notable that the descriptions of the culprit varied greatly with regard to height, dress, complexion, and hair color. The monster hunters suspected that the fiend was wearing several coats, one on top of each other, and that he made use of a collection of wigs and false noses to disguise his appearance. Mr. Angerson disagreed, pointing out that there was good reason to suspect that more than one of these wretches were infesting the streets. Some ladies faked monster attacks to gain sympathy and compassion. His propensity to attack only young and beautiful ladies made it highly fashionable to pose as one of his swooning, tearful victims, basking in the newspaper publicity and receiving visits from manly, muscular monster hunters eager to obtain a description of the mystery assailant. At this stage, some newspaper journalists, aghast at the monster they had helped to create, suggested that the attacks might be the handiwork of some inept pickpockets who were aiming to cut open the ladies' skirt pockets but stab the flesh instead. Such calls for moderation were lost in the general hubbub. It was instead speculated that the monster was a master of disguise, an insane nobleman bent on maiming every beautiful woman in London, or even a supernatural being who could make himself invisible to evade detection. The tally of victims soon reached 50. Some were cut with a sharp object, others kicked from behind with spikes fastened to the monster's knees, and some stabbed in the nose with a stiletto hidden in a nosegay that they were invited to smell at by the elusive fiend. I mean, okay, after the first time that happened, who would be going around smelling nosegays when they know that they can be stabbed in the nose with it? I mean, this is all very weird. Finally, on June 13, a suspect was arrested by the vigilante John Coleman after he had been pointed out in Green Park by Ann Porter, coincidentally, who ended up marrying John Coleman, a young lady who had been attacked by the London Monster in January the same year in front of Perrot's Bagnio, the family home at 63 St. James Street. He was the 23-year-old Welshman, Reinwyck Williams, a native of Bigeldy in the county of Radnor. The son of a respectable apothecary, he had become a ballet dancer, but was sacked from the theater after being suspected of theft. Uh-oh, we might have a criminal history here, although we don't know if he was guilty or innocent of that theft. The young Welshman then sank low in the London underworld, supporting himself by various odd jobs. For a few months, he worked as an artificial flower maker at a factory owned by the seedy Frenchman Aimable Michel. But by early 1790, he was unemployed and out in the street again. Huh. So this guy happened to work where nosegays were created. Interesting. But okay. He lived at a disreputable public house where 4 men shared 2 beds in a tiny room. That the London Monster actually slept in the same bed as another man was considered highly significant to explain his bloodthirsty crusade against the female sex. When Williams was questioned at Bow Street, the police only with difficulty prevented the mob from lynching him. Ann Porter, the monster victim who had pointed out Williams in Green Park, was certain he was the man who had cut her. She was seconded by her 3 sisters, all of whom testified that the Welshman had been in the habit of stalking them in the streets, making use of the most horrid and insulting language. Several other London monster crime victims could not pick Williams out. However, they declared themselves certain he was not the man who had cut them. In the meantime, the judges were contemplating for what crime Williams would be prosecuted. At this time, crimes were either felonies or misdemeanors. The former were serious offenses punishable by death or transportation to the Australian penal colonies. Misdemeanors were relatively milder offenses punishable by prison, pillory, or a public flogging. To cut or stab some person with an intent to maim or kill them was a misdemeanor, and the judges were uneasily aware that the general mood in London demanded that the monster should be punished severely. They found an ancient statute from the time of George I, intended to prevent weavers from destroying imported foreign clothes, saying that it was a felony to maliciously spoil and destroy any person's garments. Reinwyck Williams was tried at the Old Bailey and convicted for destroying the clothes of Ann Porter on January 19th, in spite of an alibi provided by his fellow workers at the flour factory. The judge, Sir Francis Buller, or is it Bueller, nevertheless found the stretching of the law to make the monster's crimes a felony somewhat questionable, had he not cut the clothes to make way to the flesh underneath. The matter was referred to the 12 judges of England, who decided that Reinwyck Williams should be tried again, this time for a misdemeanor. Although energetically defended by the eccentric Irish poet Theophilus Swift, who bullied Ann Porter and the other female witnesses mercilessly, the young Welshman was again convicted and sentenced to 6 years in Newgate. Is it Newgate prison called Newgate because they had a new gate? The trial served as a ceremony of exorcism. There were no more attacks, and London had been cleansed of its monster. At the time, many people saw it as an anomaly that Williams was not hanged, flogged within inches of his life, or at least transported to Australia. After all, it was punishable by death to steal a sheep or to pickpocket more than a shilling. Interesting. Today, one is instead concerned that there may have been a miscarriage of justice and that Williams was just a scapegoat who had to play the role of the London Monster in these 2 farcical trials. Many of the victims had given descriptions of the mystery assailant that did not fit Williams at all. And for the attack where the evidence against Williams was considered the strongest, he had 7 alibi witnesses, stating that he had been hard at work making artificial flowers at the time. The veracity of Ann Porter and her boyfriend, John Coleman, who had caught Williams, was cast into doubt by Theophilus Swift, and it is certain that Coleman got his hands on the London Monster reward and that they married not long after. There is also evidence that the police deliberately coached at least one monster victim to pick out Williams as the man who had attacked them. It is thus quite probable that the Welshman was just a scapegoat, unlucky enough to fall in the hands of the authorities when they needed someone to pay for the monster's crimes. The London Monster Mania of 1790 is just one example of what can be called the Phantom Attacker Syndrome. In 1819, Paris was terrorized by piqueurs who stabbed women in the behinds with sharp instruments attached to their umbrellas. The French police tried everything, even detectives dressed up in drag, to act as potential victims to find the culprits, but to no avail. In 1938, the Halifax slasher cut a number of people with razor blades. The newspapers were full of the slasher's latest outrages. Vigilantes roamed the streets, and the local women carried lengths of hose pipe filled with lead shot as protection against the slasher. After the local police had declared themselves baffled, Scotland Yard was called in. The experienced detectives found that many slasher victims had faked their own injuries to gain sympathy and recognition, just as at least one monster victim had done in 1790. They declared themselves convinced that there had never been a slasher. The whole thing was a typical example of how an urban community could react in an erratic and inexplicable way to an elusive outside threat. These phantom attackers are still with us. In May 2001, speculation was rife in India after a mysterious being had attacked several people in or near New Delhi. The Monkey Man, as he was soon dubbed, climbed the roofs and savaged people who were sleeping there. He swiftly bounded away if any person tried to grab him. There was speculation whether this threatening sharp-clawed monster was an extraterrestrial, a mutant monkey escaped from a zoo, or a sadistic hoaxer dressed in a gorilla costume. They forgot interdimensional being. There were soon more than 70 victims, and a reward of 15,000 rupees was posted for the capture of the Monkey Man. Armed police patrolled the streets of New Delhi. Vigilantes were out in force, and several innocent people were beaten up or lynched after being pointed out as the Monkey Man. But when the case was properly investigated, it turned out to be yet another episode of mass hysteria. People had faked their injuries and invented sightings of the elusive attacker. Just like the Monster Mania of 1790, the Monkey Man scare died out as suddenly as it had begun. See, here's the thing, though. Regarding the Monkey Man and some of these other issues, if there really is a legitimate threat, but they only strike a few times, all of these other factors are still in play. I mean, another hoaxer might come forward to kind of piggyback the hysteria. People might make up attacks that never happened. That doesn't mean that there weren't some attacks that really happened. Again, this is another logical fallacy, these false dichotomies. Was there a monster at all back in 1790, or was the entire scare just a case of mass hysteria? No woman was killed or seriously injured by the fiend, and some alleged victims were proved to have faked their injuries. Other purported victims may well have been injured by clumsy pickpockets, as was suggested at the time. Reinwick Williams might have been one of the roughs, habitually insulting women in the London streets, but he was hardly the monster, as judged from the disparity of the descriptions of the prowling miscreant. Unless he was one of several. It is obvious that there were several copycat monsters at large imitating the original attacker. This, in fact, constitutes the earliest known example of copycat crime. The Monster Mania of 1790 has striking parallels to our own time. An inept police force unable to find its man, a moral entrepreneur creating an urban panic by posting a huge reward, and a press frenzy that generated a climate of fear and a need to convict some person at all costs, even if the evidence was questionable. And we do indeed see this repeat of history. I mean, this happens all the time. Let's go back even further, though, to the old case of Whipping Tom. So Whipping Tom, we're going back another century. So we're going to the 1670s now. So again, we do not have exact accuracy here, but it's just curious. Every 100 years, there's some kind of deviant going around slashing or attacking people. It's kind of weird. Now, for those that don't know or are not familiar with Dennis Nilsen, this is arguably one of Britain's worst serial killers. He killed at least 12 young men in northern London between 1978 and 1983. So the 100-year curse, so to speak, has not been broken. So in 2070 or 2080, if London's still around and the world's still around, will there be another slasher of sorts, serial killer or attacker in the London area? But Whipping Tom was the nickname given to two sexual attackers in London and the nearby village of Hackney. Both would attack women walking alone and beat them on their buttocks. While there is some evidence that an earlier attacker in around 1672 was also named Whipping Tom and carried out similar attacks on women, the earliest recorded attacker of this nature was active in central London in 1681. He would approach unaccompanied women in alleys and courtyards and bend them over his knee, lift their dress, and spank them on the buttocks before fleeing. The inability of the authorities to apprehend the offender caused complaints about the ineffectiveness of London's constabulary and prompted vigilante protocols in the affected areas. I mean, is there a pattern here? A local haberdasher and his accomplice were captured and tried for the attacks. A haberdasher is a business or person who sells small articles for sewing, dressing, and knitting, such as buttons, ribbons, and zips. A second attacker, nicknamed Whipping Tom, was active in late 1712 in Hackney, then a rural village outside London. This attacker would approach lone women in the countryside and beat them on their buttocks with a birch rod. Around 70 attacks were carried out before a local man named Thomas Wallace was captured and confessed to the attacks. See, back in those days, what did they do to gain that confession? Earlier Whipping Toms, although no record exists of any similar attacks prior to 1681, or of the nickname Whipping Tom existing prior to this date, a publication of 1681 mentions the generation of that Whipping Tom that about 9 years since proved such an enemy to the milk wench's bums. A milk wench, implying that a similar attacker with the same nickname had operated in or around 1672. You know, it's weird though. I mean, the world would be a better place if instead of serial killers actually killing and maiming people, there were just some deviants of this nature that just slapped people or spanked them or whatever. I mean, obviously that's not good either. That's assault. But that's a lot better than killing people. And it's, I mean, obviously a lot of people were killed in the 1600s and 1700s and 1800s as well in the midst of wars and all these other things. But it's just weird. I mean, all of these accounts are just weird. The Whipping Tom of 1681. The Whipping Tom of 1681 was active in the warren of small courtyards between Fleet Street, Strand, and Holborn. He would wait in the narrow and dimly lit alleys and courtyards. After approaching an unaccompanied woman, he would grab her strongly, lift her dress, and slap her buttocks repeatedly with his hand before fleeing. He would sometimes accompany his attacks by shouting, "Spanko." He attacked a large number of women, and while he would often use his bare hand, he would occasionally use a rod. Some of his victims were left badly injured by the attacks. He would appear, carry out his attacks, and vanish with such speed that some people attributed him with supernatural powers. You know, it would be weird if this was some kind of interdimensional trickster entity who did these attacks in the 1600s, and maybe he was around in the 1570s and 1580s as well. There's just no record of it. And then he just slowly escalated from spanking to stabbing, and then eventually Jack the Ripper's case to flat-out killing and eviscerating in incredibly demonic fashion. Or were these just different trickster entities? Was this a family of interdimensional trickster entities, some of them more evil than the others, some of them more trickster playful type, others more prone to serial killing? Is that the real solution to the Jack the Ripper quagmire? There was a great public outcry in response to the attacks, which prompted complaints about the ineffectiveness of London's policing arrangements at the time. Women would carry penknives, sharp bodkins, scissors, and the like, and male vigilantes would dress in women's clothing and patrol the areas he was known to operate. It's just the origin of drag, to catch Whipping Tom in the 1600s. A haberdasher from Holborn and his accomplice were captured in late 1681 and tried for the attacks, although no record now exists of the trials or of their identities. In 1681, Whipping Tom brought to light and exposed to view an anonymously written book about the attacks was released. Huh. The Whipping Tom of 1712, between October 10th and December 1st, 1712, a string of further attacks took place in fields near Hackney. This attacker, also nicknamed Whipping Tom, would approach lone women and beat them with a great rod of birch. Around 70 women were assaulted before a local man named Thomas Wallace was captured and confessed to the attacks. According to Wallace, he was, quote, resolved to be revenged on all the women he could come at after that manner, for the sake of one perjured female who had been barbarously false to him, end quote. He claimed that his plan was to attack 100 women before Christmas, cease the attacks during the 12 days of Christmas, and then resume the attacks in the new year. It's a very thoughtful guy here. So basically, apparently, a woman made a false claim against him, a barbarously false claim. Now, it's unclear what that claim exactly was, but this was his retaliation for the false claim, is to attack all these. Did he even attack the woman who made the false claim? Because that'd be kind of dumb if he didn't, but... I mean, this is all quite curious, Every 100 years, there's some kind of serial slasher or spanker of some kind. This is weird. This is very, very weird. What's also interesting is in the Whipping Tom accounts, at least one of them supposedly worked with an accomplice. Now, that's curious. So, if that's the case with the London Monster and Jack the Ripper, is it possible if there's two individuals? I mean, this almost reminds me of the movie Scream, for those who haven't seen the pretty famous Wes Craven movie Scream from 1996. Spoiler alert. I mean, I don't know if people haven't seen that movie, but I'm not going to say anything about it other than it's a lot easier to get away with murder when there's more than one person doing the murder, because you technically could have an alibi and swap as necessary. Is that what happened in the Whipping Tom case? The other thing that's kind of curious is that these Whipping Tom attacks spanned roughly 3 decades. You know, there were these 3 waves, so to speak. So with at least 2 individuals involved, so more likely 3, 4, 5, or plus more, it's just really weird. And then also, again, we have these century repeats, so to speak. Is that all coincidental? Also, the way that copycats work, because technically Whipping Tom might have been the first copycat and not the London Monster, because you have all these different attacks, and then it happens again in 1712, random time period. But would it have happened if the media hadn't focused on it before? And that's an interesting conundrum too, because if all of this, I don't want to say glorifying, because I don't know if I would say serial killers are glorified in a certain extent. They are celebritized in a certain extent, but would that deter? So obviously, let's not fall for these false economological fallacies. Obviously, some people are still going to do whatever they're going to do, because otherwise laws would actually work. I mean, there's laws against murder and theft and assault. That doesn't seem to really stop many people, because there's people killing people every single day, assaulting every day, and thieving every day. But a curious question is, what percentage would be deterred by simply not knowing about it? So with serial killers too, it's not that people don't know that there are serial killers, but when you're constantly bringing this attention to people, it's constantly in the sphere of consciousness. Does that bring about more attackers? And that's kind of the main question here that I'm going to leave everybody with. I did want to just touch upon this because we're going to be referencing some things in terms of media coverage in the Jack the Ripper case in the following episodes I think it's, I don't want to say coincidental per se. I don't want to say critically important per se. But I think it would be foolish not to keep in mind the history of London and these century-based attacks and possibly a paranormal or supernatural connection. Time travelers, interdimensional entities, things of that nature. We keep it all on the table on Mindshock because the truth is not afraid of an investigation. And the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. Hope you guys enjoyed another edition of the Mindshock podcast in the Jack the Ripper case series. If you enjoy the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Help us get more mind-shocking content out there in a variety of cases and topics. Just check the link in the description. You can also become a YouTube member for access to exclusive streams and chats. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like and share, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic logical analysis, co-podcast, or request. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.